I mean, that is the big question because there's been a lot of excitement about, you just mentioned it, Rengo, about the recent shunto round of negotiations. A lot of excitement. The average Japanese worker will be getting a 5% plus raise this year. However, that only accounts for less than 20% of the Japanese workforce. As you mentioned, more than 70% of jobs in Japan are provided by small to mid-sized operators. And they're seeing higher materials costs. They're seeing a weaker yen. So in many ways, they're importing energy, material costs on a weaker currency. And so are they going to feel confident raising wages in the months ahead? That is the open question. I think you can argue in some ways that the Bank of Japan stepping in the direction of normalization is a sign of confidence for Japanese executives. If you believe that the central bank believes it's time to begin normalizing, you can argue that that suggests Japan is in a better position. But I do think, as 2024 unfolds, with China slowing, with so many question marks, with inflation rising, with wages finally rising in Japan at a moment when inflation is rising, when productivity here is kind of flatlining. Again, it's an open question as to whether, Asia's second biggest economy is ready to withstand rising wages and in an increasingly competitive world. So I'm fascinated. I've got my popcorn out for the year ahead, certainly.
William, how would you characterize, warts and all, the Japanese economy? Because there is a real sense, although this was historical, although this was characterized as the first tentative step towards an exit of ultra-loose policy, the BOJ is still very much in the game here because the economy is not firing on all four cylinders.
It is true. I think in many ways, we look at the Nikkei is at all-time highs. It's pretty incredible. But I think in many ways, Japan is, you can argue, benefiting from a safe haven bid. I mean, when you look at the chaotic world we live in at the moment, Japan looks like a pretty quiet place, and it's been an unloved place by investors for a long time. So let's give Japan a look. But the underlying economy here, as you mentioned, is not exactly going gangbusters. I mean, wages are not rising for about 80% of the workforce in a significant way. Growth, for the most part, is flatlining. And I think when the BOJ begins tightening policy, what we saw in the last 10 days is the BOJ basically clearing its throat and saying, pay attention. We haven't seen genuine tightening yet. And the question is, will the Bank of Japan have confidence to begin stepping further and further away from zero at a moment when the economy is not doing particularly well and when China is slowing? Also, the U.S., the Federal Reserve is not going to be cutting interest rates the way that Japan had assumed they would, 6 months ago. So in many ways, this is a very, very uncertain moment for Japan.